The best way to tell is listening at low volumes. See if you can hear the character of the drum. Some of the most important parts of low end is the mid-range, actually. I always say the mid-range is king because that's the most reproduced part of the sound. In any boombox and, Apple earbuds, it's going to be the mid-range. So you don't want a microphone that only captures the low end. You want something that's just really well balanced.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey, rock stars, it's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Ryan Earnhardt, a video creator and studio owner who produces a YouTube show called Creative Sound Lab. It covers recording-focused topics and out-of-the-box topics such as DIY effects. He recently built, for example, a pooper time cube, a delay made from 4-inch drainage pipe, and also created a reverb out of a garden hose. So very cool projects like that, taking household items and unusual things that you can create amazing sounds out of. Creative Sound Lab stresses fundamental recording techniques and capturing real sounds, such as using reamping during mixing or using echo chambers for vocals, even if that chamber is your living room. Ryan is also partnered in teaching with Brian McTear of Weathervane Music and author Eric Sarafin, aka Mixerman. Ryan started Creative Sound Lab in 2013 because he saw a need for something different than computer screen videos that mostly covered mixing topics. He currently has over 37,000 subscribers and hosts over a dozen online courses at creativesoundlab.tv. Ryan also has a wonderful studio called Lumen Audio in Asheville, North Carolina, which is debt-free and supports his wife and 4 kids. Shout out to you, Ryan. That's awesome. For fun, he enjoys fresh mountain air, electronic music creation, and cooking. So Rockstar's transparency here. I'm sharing with you Ryan's wonderful bio that he sent with me. So I like the way that reads, Ryan. It's like, I may have to ask you out on a date after this.
Thanks.
Which he says is just about the same mindset as mixing a song. I also want to give a big thank you to Thomas Larson, one of our rock stars listening to the show, for suggesting Ryan as a guest. Thank you, Thomas. I've always actually been a fan of your videos, Ryan, on YouTube because I discovered them before and thought they were super cool. But I always love to hear which guests the rock stars would love to hear from on the show. So thank you for that. Please welcome Ryan Earnhardt to Recording Studio Rockstars. Ryan, my man, are you ready to rock?
Yeah, man, ready to rock.
Dude, welcome to the show, man. And I got it right. You're in Asheville, North Carolina, right?
I am. Well, yeah, I mean, we've lived in Nashville for a while now, and the town that I found studio space to, well, really just that was affordable rent for a studio was just outside of Asheville in a small town called Canton, North Carolina.
Dig it. It's so beautiful there. I've traveled there and visited a handful of times over, past 20 years or something. I don't spend a ton of time there or anything, but Asheville is a beautiful town, and all the little towns that are pocketed around there. I believe it was Marshall is another small town north of there that we had visited.
Oh, yeah.
And they had an old depot that they had converted into like a music hall. And we went and recorded a bunch of old time fiddlers there many years ago.
Yeah, that's a really cool town as well.
And then are you familiar with Bascom Lamar Lunsford?
No, I'm not.
So Asheville has a big old time music festival every year, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he was the founder.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
And we've always been a big fan of his music and like all the old time music. So I dig Asheville, man.
Yeah, there's a ton of history that I just don't have a clue about because it goes back so far. I went by the museum here in Canton, and they just got talking about my last name and maybe some relatives that I would have had in the area, and then they were telling me about these guys that passed away even 10 years ago, and they were legends of bluegrass, and I just had no idea that stuff was right here, even in the county and in this town here. So it goes back pretty deep here.
Well, and of course, it's a really beautiful location. You can go for a mountain hike or, be down in the valley there. Um, but I think you said Asheville is about like a half mile above sea level or something like that too, sort of halfway as up high as Denver is.
Yeah, I mean it's like 2,500, 3,000 feet above sea level, so it's not too hot in the summer. It's just got a really good. I don't know. It's cooler than the other areas around it, and I just really enjoy it here. It's a great place to be. You get the mountains. There's nothing else like it. And every time I leave, I'm anxious to come back because there's just something about being up high and not being in a flat area.
Cool, man. I like it. Well, and I know Asheville also has some great music festivals. And then, despite the fact that you and I might be actually trying to drink a little bit less beer these days, they really do have some delicious beer there.
Oh yeah, it's been amazing. One of my favorites is Green Man Brewing, but then there's also a really good one called Wicked Weed, and it's just really kind of blown up in the past 10 years that I've been here. There's been just a ton of development of even new restaurants and things like that. There's plenty to do. It's actually I've heard a phrase that the phrase is something like where 20-somethings come to retire.
That's great.
Because there's just like so much to do, and you have to basically say, okay, I'm not going to do all these things. I got to actually go to work,
Yeah. And do you know the guys over at Echo Mountain Studios there?
Oh yeah.
Jessica Thomason and all those folks over there?
Yeah, Julian, and they're all really good guys, super professional, and I've been over there a handful of times. Went over there with my friend Eric Sarafin once or twice. So yeah.
Cool, man. One last thing, and then get back on topic here. But I know Asheville has some wonderful music festivals. One of the ones that you guys have that I feel is particularly unique is, don't you guys host the Moog Synthesizer Fest there every summer or something like that?
Well, we used to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's no longer here anymore, but it used to be here for a long time, and I'm not sure exactly on how linked in it was to Moog, Moog proper, but it's since moved like 3 hours from here. But they still do like DIY builds and stuff, like the DFAM. They had that there a couple years ago, I think, before it ever came out. And
and I figured
I've never made it.
The DIY stuff really sort of permeates the whole culture there, which has a lot to do with what you do.
Right. And speaking of DIY or rolling your own weird stuff, there's a couple other people making some things like, I believe Make Noise Synthesizers is also in town here.
Oh, cool.
I'm not sure that there's a lot of like builders here necessarily, but there's a lot of creativity, a lot of kind of homebrew, grassroots kind of thinking here, which is really cool. It's a creative town.
Well, dig it, man. Well, tell us more about who you are. Like, how'd you get into recording, briefly, and how do you end up with a studio and tell us a little bit about your studio there in Asheville.
Well, I got into recording. I started out as a drummer, and I just really wanted to learn how to record drums because, every drummer thinks it's cool to have a bunch of mics on the kit, and you want to, record it and then maybe make some music or whatever. And I think at the time I was just like doing dumb stuff like recording my drum kit and putting a bunch of reverb on it and pretending like it was a Peter Gabriel song or something. But,
nice.
Eventually that went a little deeper to where it's like, okay, how do I actually make some real songs at this point?
And you really went with Peter Gabriel. You didn't go with Phil Collins on that one?
A little bit of that too, but yeah, I just was trying to just explore sounds and have fun with it, and not necessarily go for any one genre, but I was just, I was probably a high school kid learning how to record. And it wasn't until college when I started doing like Propellerhead's Reason and then Ableton Live and started to really get into programming, composition, actually making full songs, recording live drums to electronic music kind of thing. I developed my own kind of sound doing that, and then eventually I started getting to actually recording musicians, with instruments instead of electronic stuff. So acoustic guitars, electric guitars, drums, actual bands, rock bands, things like that. And that actually started with a 3-way partnership where a mutual friend, it was basically 3 of us. And so this one friend linked somebody else, and this third guy had all the gear. My friend wanted to work the studio, and I had the space. And so between the 3 of us, we had a working studio. And in the off hours, I'd be able to use the gear, and also got opportunities to engineer some sessions, and really just kind of got thrown into the mix of working with a few artists and learning what worked and what didn't.
And this was all in Asheville?
This was actually in Tallahassee, Florida. This is back in right after I graduated college. And so that was really my beginning of recording. That's how I got into recording. So fast forward a few years, got married, ended up here in Asheville. And I had a similar partnership where I was able to get some recording studio space in exchange for doing projects for a very small label, and they paid the rent, but I exchanged work for the space that I had. And eventually that deal kind of fell apart. Just kind of got washy towards the end of like, okay, what did we agree to, and what are we going to do in the future? And I ended up having to leave, which was a good thing. It was a great motivator. And
that probably answers the question I was thinking I wanted to ask you, which is, do you want to share any thoughts on like some of the positives and some of the challenges of doing a partnership in a studio for anybody who's looking to start out something like that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely it's very challenging at first because you don't know what each person wants exactly. You kind of move and wiggle into the position. And then as time goes on, it's like, hey, like there's a drum set up and it's been here for like a week, like I needed the space or whatever. And so as time goes on, it can get a little weird, but I've entertained a couple different ideas, and there's great ways to do it. If 2 people have gear, but they don't have enough gear to make a studio, you just, do basically a timeshare or like a shared space, and you have a bigger studio than what you could have individually. But for me here, that partnership that I was getting a free studio space, it came to an end, and it was devastating, but it was a good motivator. So I found the space over here in Canton, which was just 15 minutes out of Asheville. And I've been here for 6 years now.
Nice, man. Beautiful. Well, describe your studio to us.
Well, it's basically in downtown Canton. It's a really laid back town. The people here are really cool, really nice. It's basically a brick building that is in the downtown here. It used to be an old appliance store, and they would have like stoves and I guess refrigerators and things like that. And I think it's been a while since it's been an appliance store. And I found it, and it was at a time where it had been divided up into a couple of different rooms already. And so I just put some paint on the walls and modified it just a little bit, but not much at all. And it's basically 3 rooms. I have a live room in the back that's 15 feet wide by 25 feet deep, 12-foot ceilings. And then I have a control room in the middle of the building that's 15 feet wide, because that's, the width of the building, because it's a connected downtown building. And the length of that's similar. And then the front room is basically the same size as the other 2 as well. So it's 3 equally portioned rooms, and I can get a pretty good sound, here in the control room. And the live room, I think, sounds great. I mean, I can get a great drum sound. It's kind of a short but kind of open sound. It's not a big sound, but it's a really nice short, open sound.
It's compression friendly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm watching your videos. I was really digging all the drum sounds you were getting it. And it's fun to see you playing drums on a lot of that stuff too, because I could tell that you have a real appreciation for just cool sounding drums and stuff that sounds exciting and big. And I'm looking forward to getting into that more. Rox, as a reminder too, this episode, Ryan's going to dig into 4 ways for you to think creatively in the studio. And we're going to get into some specific topics. So hang tight for that. But before we get there too, let's keep rolling forward with some of the intro. I like, Ryan, to ask our guests to share an inspirational quote to kick off the podcast, and wondered if you had anything to just kind of get us psyched about hitting the studio.
Yeah. So this is one that has been kind of it's been kind of a theme for me for a while. And I don't know who said this, okay? But it goes like this: record like there is no mixing, mix like there is no mastering.
That's great, man. That's great. What if we wanted to take that back even further? It would be like, perform like there is no engineer. I don't know.
Well, I actually thought of that. Like just before you called me, I said, I wonder if we could remix this quote. And I said, perform like there is no DAW.
Yeah.
Like if they knew it was to tape and it was like, okay, like you get your shot and then we're going to hit stop after you're done. Like it would probably be okay. Like we got to be present. We got to nail this, we gotta rock it, So
yeah, and like write like there is no band or something, like make sure that you've got a song that clearly sort of tells you what maybe you should be doing when you're playing,
I'm sure this could go really nuts on like a long car ride if you were like kept going further and further back with it to the point where you're like
be born like you'll never grow old.
And then eventually somebody is like, what are we talking about here?
All right, cool. Well, that is my philosophy in life. Live life like I don't know what it is actually. just have a good time. That's my philosophy. It was Viv Savage in Spinal Tap where he was like, have a good time all the time. That's my advice right there. Groovy, dude. Well, so I think that's a great quote, and I think we get the idea, which is basically like, don't save things for later. Don't dial, phone it in right now, thinking that everything will be cool later. Try and deliver in every moment. I do think there's a flip side to that too, because sometimes you can get frustrated feeling like you're not delivering, and it doesn't mean you should put the brakes on everything. Sometimes it's like you got to have the attitude that says, I'm in the moment, I'm delivering my very best right now, so that the next stage, if I'm writing, this performance in the studio will be great, or if I'm performing, the recording will sound great, if I'm performing well. But, at the times where you run into something where you're like, all right, here's a level of a problem that I just can't solve right this second, it can be good to just be like, that's cool, man. I did what I could. We'll address that next one at the next stage if we can.
Yeah, and there's ways to kind of mitigate the injury there. If you're not sure, let's say guitar tone. If you're not sure, just grab the DI. Put a DI, use the through jack, and connect the through to the amp, and at least you have the DI for later. But yeah, a lot of it's just like, okay, that the guitar sounds a little bit too muddy, so just move the mic a little bit.
Right,
get out of the chair, and just say, hey, this is a part of recording. You don't have to even apologize. Just say, yeah, this is normal. We're going to go back and forth a few times to make sure the mic position is correct. And a lot of that's a great way to think and to do less EQing later. Again, record like there is no mixing. So record like there is no EQ.
Yeah, I dig it. Listening to what you just said, the implication is that maybe you're the engineer in that scenario and you're recording and somebody else is performing, and you're doing a little bit of back and forth, and perhaps you're concerned that the people who are performing are interpreting your back and forth and your mad scientist ways as, something's wrong. Because I hear people say that. I hear people can make comments like that in the studio sometimes, where they will say stuff, they'll imply that something's wrong or something always goes wrong. And it's like, that can really kind of get under your skin a little bit. And a great way to solve that is to just simply like calmly and confidently let everybody know, no, nothing's wrong. Everything's cool. This is just normal stuff. And that gives everybody else the confidence to not have to worry about it too.
Yeah, totally. And, to kind of spin that a different way is that you can actually use that same dynamic to buy the artist some confidence. So if they actually mess up and they messed up, I've done it where I'm like, hey, I didn't have the gain set quite right on your mic. I might get a better, and then they're like, oh, okay,
I totally do that too. And I've forgotten who it was, but somebody else shared that advice on the podcast as well in the past, which is, it's a nice, generous gesture.
Yeah. It's almost like you feel safe. It's not unprofessional, but you feel safe that you're not going to lose your professionalism by admitting that, hey, I might have made a mistake. And it kind of buys them some grace in the process, and it kind of takes off the pressure a little bit of them.
Yeah. And then this is popping into my head too, but just thinking about the idea of trying to get things perfectly right in the moment. The band might have a mistake on a take they did, and they might be feeling like, oh man, that they might be totally focused on the mistake and want to do it again, and not realize that the whole next take, just like in general, isn't as good as the one that had the mistake in it. And those are good times to maybe, as an engineer or producer, just say, you know what, I can totally fix that one little mistake. That's not actually a big deal, because generally that take was really great. It had a great feel to it. So just that whole back and forth, that balance of recording like there's no mix, but sometimes, reminding people that a little bit of post-production in between can go a long way.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of times they don't understand what that line is. Can you fix it? A lot of times it's, can you mix it? And like I had somebody say, hey, can we have this song blend into the next track? And I'm like, okay, well, that might be more on the mastering side to make sure that the sustain is carrying over into this other song, if that's what you're asking for.
Yeah.
So a lot of times they just don't understand the line and the boundaries of when stuff has to be fixed, when and where, and what can be done later.
Cool, man. Well, that's great. I like that. I'm glad we went off on that little topic there for a sec. We're going to get into some of these creative tips from you. But before we do too, I wondered if you wanted to share a story from your experience recording and being in the studio where maybe something was kind of a nightmare moment, like a really important failure in the studio that turned into a great learning experience for you.
Huh.
Or maybe something in the recording process that you feel like you see this come up again, mistakes that turn out to be wins.
Right. You mentioned the word nightmare, and I think it's really easy when you're in a recording session, or let's just say you have friends over to record, right? It's just that moment where everybody's kind of waiting on you to set things up and to hit record. And if something's not right, hopefully fix it right away or as soon as possible. And you kind of get in this panic of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to fix this? Or what do I do? Or sometimes like a neighbor fires up a motorcycle in their driveway next door, and it's like, oh my gosh, like it's my fault, like this is supposed to be my studio, and now the client's looking to me like this is my fault, and I have to like, what do I do? Do I give them a discount? Do I get them coffee? Like, how can I make this right? And I carried a lot of weight of like all the variables, and instead of carrying that weight, I just learned to just kind of accept it and be like, well, sometimes it happens, and I've learned that we can kind of laugh about it, and, we can get through it.
The two examples that pop into mind that I think are just come back all the time is you're doing a bass recording and you're getting the bass up, and then you're like, oh, there's a buzz in the bass. And then you listen to it and you're like, oh, that buzz is too loud, isn't it? Is that buzz too loud? Is that going to be, that's too loud, isn't it? And then you can really go down a rabbit hole there. You can get caught in a spiral that gives everybody the sense that something's broken and isn't going to work and everything. But then, somehow if you do, you try a ground lift and you flip a ground switch on the DI or whatever you've got until you get to the point at which you say, well, that just is part of the sound. So often you discover by the time you get to the end of the recording that you don't even hear a buzz. You don't even remember that you were worried about a buzz at the beginning. And I find that happens a lot. And it's a good example of just sort of, you go through and you try and solve it. You do the handful of things you need to solve it, and then you just let it go and just say, well, it's just the way it is. And if it's a problem, let's not fix it unless it's a problem. And we may not know whether it's a problem until later on.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times when that situation, like I've run into this with like microphone selection or not realizing I screwed up until it was like too late. And I don't try to show my cards too much. I just say, okay, let's try this one,
Right.
And I think I saw a video online of a vocalist. It wasn't from my studio. It was something I saw. And it was like the vocalist, and she goes up and sings like on the part of the microphone stand or something. And it wasn't even like the mic. And the engineer's like, yeah, the engineer is super cool about it. He's like, oh, okay. Well, how about this? Let's try something different. How about let's try this side? Yeah, let's just see if this sounds any better. I just want to see. And
that's so funny.
as if they're equally viable options, but in our head, it's like, no, of course not. But so I've done that where it's like, oh my gosh, like, that DI box didn't have let's say it didn't have a battery in it. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's try this DI box, see if it sounds better.
Dude, how many times have we set up a mic or had an assistant set up a mic or somebody, and the mic's just pointing, it's just the wrong side of the mic, it's just pointing backwards.
Yeah. And so for that, it's like, okay, well, let's try a different polar pattern here. Okay, let's try another take.
Yeah, I dig it. Okay. And I think the other, I mentioned bass, but guitar is the other one. It can really throw you off as the studio owner when a guitar player plugs in a guitar and now there's a buzz in it and somebody gives you the indication or that they're implying that, oh, I don't ever have a buzz problem normally. And then you're like, oh man, just like, so do I have something going on here? Is it really a problem? Is it maybe they don't really know that they have a buzz and now we're just under a magnifying glass? And again, I find that the best way to do that is just try and do what you can to make sure that you're not screwing something up. Check your ground lifts where you can. Turn the, if it's a single coil guitar pickup, have them move around a little bit and find out if there's a sweeter, less buzzy spot. And then just move forward and just be like, yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Let's just see how it goes, and because, usually the guitar player just wants to get recording. They don't want to get stuck, trying to put a mic on their amp all day long. And then a lot of times, you get down the road and it sounds just fine.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that, it can really get under your skin in a weird way and kind of a confidence kind of issue way where all of a sudden you're like, wow, like, my studio is noisy. I'm doing something wrong. It can really kind of mess with your head. And like the faster you can get moving or the faster you can just say like, okay, everybody has these problems and nobody gets it perfect 100% of the time.
Yeah, dig it. All right. Well, so let's, rock stars, jump into our topic of the day. Ryan, you brought some cool stuff to talk about as far as 4 ways to think creatively in the studio. Your specialty with your YouTube channel, which is wonderful, man. Actually, maybe we should give you a chance to also introduce the YouTube channel. Tell us about that before we get into the topics. But you make these videos where you really get creative. Like, you're so right. Most everybody's making videos out there on the internet where it's just a screen share of somebody's DAW and they're showing you a plugin and, how to record something or how to do an edit or how to route something or mix. And then I saw your stuff and I was like, wow, this is really cool. Here's somebody who's actually, going out, finding garden hose at the store and showing us how to build, a delay with garden hose. And of course, you called it the Pooper Time Cube, which is a play on the Cooper Time Cube, which is like an old school literally a garden hose, I think, with a driver and a mic in it, and coiled up in a box.
Yeah.
And I believe originally that was sort of one of the early, very short analog delays in the studio. I feel like you hear that on David Bowie and stuff like that, but I can't tell you which tracks they were. But it's from that kind of 1970s era, right?
Yeah, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole too much, but that really drives my curiosity to see, like, that always fascinates me, is like what gear was used on what albums and how.
Yeah.
And just because it's one thing to see a demo video, like when UAD comes out with a new plugin and it's like, oh, cool, like it's a Cooper Time Cube plugin. But it's another thing to be like, oh, wow, like David Bowie used this on this song. And
right, because that gives you an idea of how that sound is actually useful. When you hear a song or a music or a recording that inspires you, and then you find out what tools went into making that, that's where it gets exciting, right?
Yeah. And the Pooper Time Cube was actually a Mixerman idea. Eric Sarafin came over and we started making videos together, and he was telling me about this idea, and he was just kind of saying it in passing of like, oh yeah, I try this. It was a funny story because the cartage guys always give me a hard time of wheeling in this stupid massive, drainage pipe. And
that's great.
But he could never place exactly what song it was, but it was some Ben Harper song where he put it up to, right next to the vocal mic, and he used it as like a real-time live capturing effect where the vocal would go back. I'm sorry, it would go down and come back again somehow. It's really odd, but it actually gives you the delay right back to the source.
And I think that's also Chad Blake, brings a lot of that drainage pipe with the stereo Dunkov head, the binaural head.
Yeah. That's somebody I'd really like to get to meet someday, just to get to have a chat with. He's a really cool guy. Moses Schneider is also a guy with some unique drum sounds. Cool. Sylvia Massey, of course. So yeah, there's some really cool creative people out there.
Well, give us a brief intro to your YouTube channel, and then let's dive into the topic of the day.
Yeah, so Creative Sound Lab, the YouTube channel, is just a place where I create creative sound labs, where it's a laboratory of sound. I try out ideas. I try to find new sounds, hopefully practical sounds, and I try to get viewer feedback. I try to listen to what people have to say and say, hey, what do you guys think? I'll be hanging out in the comments below. And I listen, I get people talking and they give me ideas. And then a lot of times I'll do a follow-up video. And so I did like a garden hose. It was inspired by a Sylvia Massey idea, and kind of developed my own spin on it, developed it, tested it for a week and a half probably. And I developed a stereo version. And then people really responded to that. They gave tons of ideas. They said, hang it above the drums, hang it to the side of the drums, wrap it around my neck. I mean, all these like crazy ideas. Right. And so, yeah, I just try to go nuts with having fun. But I also have a lot of fundamental things like, hey, when you're recording drums, you're sucking the life out of your drums if you're having phase issues. And you might have pitch issues if you're recording vocals with headphones. Maybe not, but here's how to solve that. Just by recording without headphones. Here's some techniques. And so there's a lot of fundamentals in there too.
Dig it. That's a great topic too. I'm glad you brought that up. We were just running into that the other day, and I was trying to explain to a client that somebody I was recording that your sense of pitch can be completely altered in headphones. I learned that years ago when I was trying to tune vocals in headphones, and it didn't go well, and it would go well if I was tuning in speakers. So that is a thing for sure.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, so, and if the rock stars want to find it, they should go check out creativesoundlab.tv.
Yep. creativesoundlab.tv, and also on YouTube as Creative Sound Lab.
Okay, cool. Well, Rockstar, as a reminder, of course, I put together a YouTube playlist of Ryan's some of his top videos, and they're going to be in the show notes. And you can, of course, just go to rsrockstars.com to go check that out straight at the website. But let's dive in and start talking about some of these topics. 4 ways to think creatively in the studio. I believe the first topic has to do with changing the method. Take it away, Ryan.
Right. So we actually just hit on this a little bit, is recording vocals without headphones. So change the method. What does that mean? Well, basically, for all these 4 ways of thinking creatively, change the method is just a way of interrupting your autopilot, trying to interrupt what you usually think of and trying to find some new sound that you never found before. And sometimes it works on the musician level, sometimes it works on the mixing level, and a lot of times for this stuff, it'll be on the recording level because, again, if you record like there is no mixing, then hopefully a lot of your coolness is captured, and then you mix it just to help it translate. So change the method is the first way of kind of mixing things up for you in the studio. And one of the things is, you could record with no headphones. So that would be almost like a, let me see here. Yeah, that would be like a, almost like a mechanical musician thing where.
I mean, like when you say no headphones, I think about a session where maybe I've got the band out in the room and nobody's wearing headphones. So we're just putting mics in front of the instruments and letting them play acoustically in the room. Or like when John Cuniberti was on the show talking about his one mic project, same thing. The band just plays acoustically in the room and there's a single mic in the middle. Or there's also no headphones in terms of overdubs, where you've got the speakers playing the sound back instead of headphones and you're overdubbing to it. Are you familiar with the White Elephants, which were they were like the big overdub speakers that would be in the studio at Abbey Road for the Beatles? They would actually play back the track on a speaker and I think put a figure 8 mic in front of it so that it's rejecting the speaker, but picking up whoever's on either side of the mic for the overdubs.
Right. So kind of the way that I've divided this, and I'm trying to decipher my notes here because I got about 20 ideas even on this one topic of changing the method, but I have it kind of divided into mechanical and then non-mechanical and then time shifting.
Okay, cool.
So, so the non-mechanical stuff is kind of what you talked about with the one mic of John Cuniberti, of just get people in a room. If you're multi-tracking where you're layering things one at a time, you'd be amazed how different it sounds if you get people playing all together.
Yeah, totally.
You mentioned the vocals. Well, I have down here the background vocals, harmonizing together. That can be huge. You can also try recording with no click. You could try recording with no lights on. Or I've even heard that you can actually just about heat up the room and about cook everybody in the studio. But it does this weird, I've never tried it, but I recently heard about an artist that loves to do this, and they just like it really hot in the studio. And for some reason, it affects their performance, where they're just kind of more angsty and passionate and like, let's do this, And so
I totally agree with
like that.
We've talked about that on the show. My recollections of band rehearsals and recording situations, where we didn't even have nice air conditioning in a studio. I feel like heat tends to generate better rock and roll than cold. And I think as a band, you could walk into a studio that's like super, super nice and super, super controlled, or it's iced down a little bit too much. And it might feel like it's kind of taken the energy and the vibe out of what you want to do.
Right. So like all those things are things that affect the music that you can easily just kind of modify that ultimately affect the result, right? So that would be like the non-mechanic, but then the mechanical for changing the method would be, change how you're plugging in the mics. You can go like a harmonica mic going into a guitar amp. I've done that for vocal. It was kind of weird. I might want to do it if I did it in the future, I'd do it with a second mic. But you can also record a mic into a compressor, or instead of thinking of reamping with guitar, instead think of it as reamping with vocal, or think of it as reamping with all your effects cranked, like the spring reverb, so you're getting that vocal effect. So it's changing the method you usually do into something a little different.
It's funny, you talk about recording a vocal into a compressor. The opposite too. Like if you're used to trying to get a really compressed, EQ'd, sort of excited sound for a vocal in the studio, and you're sort of proud of that, you might try the opposite. You might say, you know what, I'm just going to, I remember Brad Jones, one of my mentors when I started out, he told me this one day. He was like, yeah, I'm not recording with compression anymore when I record vocalists in the studio. Just a mic pre, lots of level. You might discover that having it really loud in the mix allows the singer to sing more confidently and begin to control their own dynamic too. So it's that switching it up. And I almost feel like the implication from you when you talk about changing your method is, first maybe I figure out what your method is, like has been, so that you kind of know what to change.
Right. So, I'm sure a lot of people that have limited mic selection, or I should say quantity of mics. So if you only have several mics and you can't record so much, it could be difficult to record live. But you can try other things, like you could try recording without click, for example, and that would give a lot of organic qualities into the recording.
Totally, I've seen click do wonderful things for a track, and I've seen it do terrible things to a track. Or I should say I've heard it.
Yeah. So just a few more things on this change the method business. I have the time shifting idea. And this comes into like when you're recording people, you don't always have to record the sounds at the time you record the performance. So if you're recording live, you can plug in DI with the guitars, and then when the drummer is not playing, then record those guitar amps in a quiet room. It's just a time shifting. It's still the same recording, the same performance, but you're changing the method of how you actually get the sounds by time shifting when you're actually capturing the real sounds for the actual song.
So wait, keep explaining that. What do you mean by time shifting them?
Yeah, so basically, you're building a mix by sounds that are recorded at different times. So it's kind of like multi-tracking. But like one idea is reamping, or I even have snare reamping. It's like if you didn't get it quite right, or the conditions are just simply not possible to do something when you're recording other people in the room, then you have to time shift it. So if you want to record a room mic on, let's say, a guitar amp, that I know that sounds weird for a guitar amp, but let's say it's some sort of lead part that's very expressive, and for some reason you want a room mic. Well, you can't really do that with a drum set playing in the room at the same time. But once the drums are done recording, you have the tracks, then you can use the DI tracks to reamp in that room. The room is quiet. It's the same performance as live, but now your sounds are actually clear of any of that bleed.
Yeah, and you might be able to be in the same space that the drums are in, so it sounds glued together sonically.
Exactly. It's almost like having two live rooms or two living rooms or wherever your recording space is. You're time shifting to get the most out of what you have, but you're still getting a live performance, which is, again, like a tweak, kind of a hack for getting the best energy out of a recording and musicians in a room.
And the cool thing about that is there's so many funky, fun things you can do by just taking recordings and sort of sending them back out through speakers, through something, re-recording them with different variations. We used to do that. That used to be our plugins. Before we had plugins, we used to get excited about all these playful ways of treating sounds, sort of pre-mixing them by creating real effects, running them out to gear or running them out into the room and re-amping the room or re-recording the room. And then once plugins came along, everything became, playful inside the computer. So again, shout out to you, Ryan. That's why I like your channel so much, is because you're bringing us back to what, used to be really cool about making records. And Rockstar's a reminder. I've said this many times, but, one of the great things about computers is you can do just about anything you can imagine in there. One of the worst things about computers is you're going to be standing still or sitting your ass in a chair for hours and hours while you do it. And it used to be that you'd get up out of your chair and walk out into the room and move things around and do all this, it was a more active way of recording. So I think I applaud that as far as another good reason to use these kind of old school methods for it.
Right.
So what you talked about, like reamping the drums. Maybe give the Rockstars a little bit of an introduction to that too, because that is a great thing to do. And I remember seeing that for the first time as far as trying to get a cooler snare sound than your original recording. And any other stuff around that topic you want to talk about?
Yeah. And it kind of goes into kind of, I'm gonna kind of reorder these, but it kind of goes into the point where the next way is to add some air, which is to, we have change the method and then add some air. So that's kind of my point too.
Okay.
And so, yeah, with snare reamping, you're just literally trying to, you put a speaker on top of a snare drum and it causes the drum to vibrate, and you can record the bottom of the drum. But when I was doing it, I was like, this is an opportunity for me to add some air. So I was not only changing the method completely of how I was recording the snare. It was actually a very poorly recorded snare drum. I had no option. I wasn't the engineer. But instead of using, I could say, what we've been referring to as time shifting methods of recording something later, but I said, well, let's add some air at the same time. Let's set up some room mics. So it turned into this whole effect where it wasn't just getting a snare sizzle, but it was getting the room as well. And so I've kind of adopted this idea that, and you talked about getting up out of your chair. Like when I'm mixing, I'm kind of doing that a lot. I'm getting up out of my chair and tweaking my vocal effect by moving the room mic and playing the vocal into my room. And if it doesn't sound right, I'll keep kind of moving the mic.
That's
I
cool.
do that. I've done that with snare reamping. I've done it with my front lounge. It's a little bit more reverberant out in the front. And it's just the concept of taking it out of the DAW, out of the box, and just letting just the very three-dimensional qualities of a real room be a part of your recording.
I think it's super cool. My buddy Adam Long up in St. Louis, he does that regularly in his apartment studio where he just will play stuff back out through the room and reamp it. And it always has this quality of gluing his mixes together just by adding that element of a space to reblend all these overdubs in. Just for clarity's sake, Rockstars, when Ryan's talking about reamping the snare, oftentimes it's taking the original, maybe the top mic recording of a snare drum, playing and just only playing that through the speaker, which is sitting on a snare drum, on a physical snare drum now, and it's replaying the snare, and then you can sort of mic the bottom of it. And like you say, Ryan, you can also put some room mics out and get sort of space around the snare sound and create a real acoustic effect for the snare that can sort of breathe some life back into your drums if they didn't really sound that great to begin with. And I imagine that we've got a lot of listeners who have home studios where there's just not a lot of space to record the drums, and it might be easier later to reamp the drums in a way that lets you play your drum recording back in the hallway and then put a mic in the other end, and now you've got this bigger sound when you weren't necessarily able to do that when the drums were actually being recorded.
Right. And you can always, have a boombox and go to a stairwell, like I remember at my university, there was a stairwell that was great for this. I never did this, but, you could always just kind of sneak in. And if you have a free, 5 minutes, real late at night, you could just make a quick recording with a little Zoom recorder and a boombox and get a free snare reverb,
Yeah, that's actually a really great technique. We used to take two boomboxes And you'd have a cassette in each one. And what you would do is this great trick I remember learning about in, quote, electronic music class many years ago, where you would read a sentence of dialogue, but in this case, it could be musical stuff. And you play it back in one boombox, and across the room, you record it on the other one, that tape, and then you rewind both tapes. And then you play the recording back again across the room to the other jam box and record it there. And if you go back and forth like 5 to 10 times, the original sound sort of devolves into nothing but the resonant frequencies of the space in the room. And you get the weirdest, most otherworldly sounds you've ever imagined. So I think that would be super cool to do that for instruments.
That is a wild idea. I have not thought of that idea. That's pretty cool.
New video coming, rock stars. keep your eye out on Ryan's channel for that one.
So yeah, we've talked about chambers. We've actually talked about reamping. So that's another way to add some air. You don't have to just use the close mics. You can add some room mics. You can a lot of times I'll use a little harmonica amp. A very low wattage amp, and I'll use that for distorted vocal. And a lot of times I'll ditch the direct mics and I'll just save the room mics, and that'll be like a dirty, dark vocal effect. And I'll add 40 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds of delay on that, and it's kind of a dirty, slapback, roomy vocal effect that it's really one of my favorite effects, and that's all about adding some air.
Nice.
Then the third way to add some air, I'm sure there's tons of ways to do this, but the third one at least is get it out of the box and go into guitar pedals. So it's not technically adding some air, but it's getting out of the box and it's going through effects that's in the guitar world that usually you think of as using for guitar or bass or whatever. And when you're in the guitar world, then you have the opportunity to either go back in via DI, or you can go right into a guitar amp. And with that, you have access to spring reverb. And then again, the room, you can set up room mics. So this just goes down and down the rabbit hole as far as you want to go.
So Rockstar, as a reminder, in order to get out of the DAW and into a guitar pedal, I'd say there's a couple of ways to do it. Because I've tried a bunch. If your interface has a 1/4 inch output, you can always just try plugging a guitar cable into it, bring the level way down and go into a pedal and see what happens. But a lot of times your levels coming out of your DAW may be at line level and they might be balanced, TRS or XLR, in which case you might want to use a box like, again, John Cuniberti's Reamp box, which I think now you get from Radial. I think he sold Reamp to Radial years ago.
Yeah.
But those are boxes that allow you to take this line level signal and knock it down to a lower, more usable, high impedance guitar cable signal, which can go into a guitar pedal. Another thing you can do is you can actually just come out of your interface, use an XLR turnaround adapter and go into a DI box, and then come out of the 1/4 inch jack into a guitar pedal. And then like Ryan's saying, to come out of the guitar pedal and go back into your mic pre, you use a second DI box and knock it back up. So that stuff, I remember the first time I discovered that, it's like you have these real holy shit moments when you're like, wow, I can do all this stuff, kind of connect it all together like that. It's really fun.
I mean, it's like I kind of need to make a meme of like some dude mixing and then like a pile of pedals right behind his mixing chair. And it's like the meme would say, your best effects are right behind you, because there's so many effects on a pedal board, and if you get a reamp box, then all of a sudden you have access to put vocal through any one of the reverb pedals you have.
Yes.
So there's tons of stuff that's there. Any of the distortion you have, the compressor pedal for drums are amazing. And yeah, you got to sit there and record it real quick, but still, like, that's a real effect. It's something that's not a plugin. It's usually sounding pretty good,
Yeah. So again, Brad Jones, shout out to him. But I remember when he bought a Memory Man and kind of permanently hooked that up near the console, and it was just part of his mixing technique. And then, rockstars, any of you who are guitar players first and have a home studio, just remember, like, you probably have your guitar rig and you probably have your pedal board sitting there that is part of recording guitar every day, but literally like 2 boxes. You get a reamp box and you get a DI box, and you hook that up as well, so that every time you're in the computer and you're not recording a guitar in that moment, you know, a couple of guitar cables unplugged and replugged back in, and now your pedal board is part of this signal chain coming out of your Pro Tools and back in again, or your Logic or your Studio One or your Reaper or your Mixbus 32 or whatever you're using. Apologies to anybody who I'd left out there. Cubase, but you know, you've got now this effects rack that you're already familiar with, because you're used to getting cool guitar sounds through it. So I think that's great advice, Ryan.
Yeah, it's really cool. In addition to that, if you have an interface that has more than just 2 outputs for your left and right monitor, if you have a 3rd and 4th output or 8 outputs, just leave one permanently connected to that reamp box. And then you can use like a utility plugin. I know Logic has the in-out plugin. So you just say output 3, and then input, and then whatever the pre is, let's say input 1, and then it's literally like a plugin. You just, you know, double click and you're there. You're shooting the sound out to the pedals and back in again. So
now, quick reminder, rock stars, this is a situation where you have to consider latency. Just be aware that depending on your DAW and depending on the setup, it's sending the audio out through some stuff and back in again, which means it's now, you know, delayed. It's behind the pack, which is still playing, you know, inside your DAW. That was a weird analogy to call the music the pack, but you know, you've got your audio in the DAW, and different DAWs will compensate for that. They'll actually do delay compensation for the fact that you're going out and back in again. And if that's the case, now then what you're recording through your guitar pedals will be in phase with the rest of your sounds in the computer. But if it's not compensating properly, then what you're going out of the computer to and back in again may be slightly behind and delayed and out of phase with what's in the computer. So that's just something to be aware of. You're going to have problems if you or you would run into problems if you're trying to do that and you wanted 2 things to be very locked, you know, sort of dry, up close sounds that are locked together. But if your effects are all sort of delays and reverbs, then that won't matter so much, because the sound you're creating is one that's sort of behind the original sound anyway.
Yeah, one way to do that on any DAW is just to grab you know, 1 click of a metronome or a 1 sample click and actually play that through the effects or play that through a reamp or whatever. And that way it's just a little insurance to know that you can line it up later if you want to manually do it. And
you record that back into your DAW, and then you can visually see whether or not what you recorded back in is sort of behind the original click, right?
Right, exactly.
Cool, good tip, man. Well, these are fantastic, man. I'm excited to get into more of these. Let's take a break for just a moment, and then we'll come back in for the second half of the show, and we're going to talk about sympathetic vibrations in the studio. Ryan may still have some more stuff to talk about air. I'm not sure yet. And we're going to be talking about, I think it was scaling the time as well.
Yeah, record at a time.
Okay, groovy. Rockstars.
Scale at a time, yeah.
Rockstars, we'll see you in just a moment for the second half in the jam session. Reminder, you're going to find links to everything we're talking about in the show notes. If you're on your mobile device, just click through right now and you will see clickable links in the show notes. Or just go to the website, rsrockstars.com, search for Ryan Earnhardt, Ryan, and that will take you to the blog post. We'll see you guys in just a minute for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, And you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, rock stars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hey, rock stars, we're back now for the jam session, the second half of the show. My guest today is Ryan Earnhardt from Creative Sound Lab TV and Lumen Audio Studio in Asheville, North Carolina. Ryan, are you ready to jam?
Yeah, I'm ready to rock.
Cool, man. Well, let's keep talking about some of these great ways to think creatively in the studio. I believe you had a couple more topics for us.
Yeah, so the next one is sympathetic vibrations. And this one's a super cool one. It's a really simple concept, but it can be really cool and really mind-blowing if you find something that works.
And so you did, as evidenced on your videos. Rockstars, you're going to want to see these ones. They're super cool.
Well, and I have a few to try yet. So there's like videos that I still have to kind of sculpt out of the stone and find and do experiments to make these videos. But so the idea is that you have a loud sound in a room and it makes other things vibrate at the same time. We see this with like snares vibrating when you leave them on and you plug in a bass guitar and you're playing a bass amp.
Yeah.
But the idea is to use this for our advantage. So I was mixing some drums, and for some reason I soloed the tom track of like the rack tom. And I said, that sound is really cool. And it was like a kind of a tonal filtered sound that was really muddy, but it was the sound of my drum resonating. And it had a dynamic mic on that tom, and it sounded really cool. And I'm like, well, I think it was like a Sennheiser E604, which is a clip-on. And it gave me the idea, just because it was attached to the drum, of like, I wonder if the drum itself was kind of like a room mic that's moved, like, it's a mobile entity like a room mic that's just moved around the room. And depending on where the tom is with the microphone on the back, it'll change the sound of where it's positioned. And so I started putting the tom out in front of the drum kit with the microphone right behind it. And the sound would go through the drum or make the drum vibrate. And then the microphone would get that filtered sound.
So cool, man.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like resonance to it, but there's also just like this gooey mid-range kind of thing. And if you do one, like I did this a few years ago with just one drum, and it sounded really cool. It's like the perfect, like probably late 80s, like old school, like rap, like hip hop kind of drum sound.
Yeah.
Where it's like that really chewy lo-fi sound. But you have to use a dynamic mic to get it. And then I did it recently where I'm like, let's just go crazy with this and let's set up every drum that I have in the studio.
And you got a couple.
Yeah. So I ended up with, how many was it? I think it was 9 drums. I think 9 toms. And they were all pitched a little bit differently. The idea actually was to go for that old school hip hop kind of thing where it's like that doom, 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 doom. But I couldn't quite find the pitches. I actually did like this. I have a video of me playing one drum at a time to like a melody, and basically all 9 drums have microphones behind them. And so I'm recording 9 different pitches at the same time. I'm playing drums, recording 9 different tracks of these different pitches. So each microphone, each of the 9 tracks has a different pitch. So I could actually solo each track at a different time to create a melody. Depending on which track I'm soloing, it gives a different melody. And
it's so cool sounding, dude. On the video, that part just blew my mind.
Yeah. So, the tom makes a pitch. So I figured out the high tom could be like this pitch, and then, this one was like a fifth below that tom. But what was really cool is I wasn't expecting this, but that when I played every tom at once, it was like, whoa, that's huge. That's really huge. And it was just this massive, massive drum sound.
And what was remarkable too is that it doesn't sound unfocused.
Right. I mean, there's a lot going on. It's almost like a really noisy like reverb or something, but it's very Bonham-like,
Yeah.
But it's basically all 9 drums at once, and I kind of panned them out a little bit. So some of the tom tracks are like panned out this way and a little bit that way, and some of them down the middle. But yeah, there's a lot you can do with some sympathetic vibrations. To develop this further, you can get into contact mics, which can be connected to pieces of metal, plates. I don't have a plate reverb, but I've always wondered if I had a plate reverb, what would it sound like just to throw it next to the drum set,
Yeah. It probably sound like the drum set getting destroyed by a giant metal plate landing on it.
Yeah. So you can just go further and further with this.
Let me follow up on that. Rockstars,
Yeah.
If you haven't explored contact mics, don't pause the podcast, do it afterwards, but go just literally go over to eBay or your Amazon app or whatever is the super easy way to do it, and just search contact mic. And you can pick these little things up. They'll be they might be anywhere from $1 or $2 each to $10 or something like that. But I remember the first time I bought them, it's a one of the versions, of course, is a piezo pickup that is connected to a cable with a jack on it, a 1/4-inch jack that you can plug into a guitar cable, and then maybe the whole thing sort of dipped in rubber or something sort of sealed. But I remember getting a few of these, and you can just clip them onto anything you can think of. You can get that I would get the poster adhesive putty and use that to stick it to things, and you get these weird ways of getting sounds and recording stuff. I've done it to the piano even.
Yeah, and that was kind of my next idea, is to, beyond just tuning pitches to toms, is my upright piano has a sostinato pedal, which allows you to hit chords. You could always just have a guy in there, holding down a chord, but you could hold down a chord, or you could put a center block on the whole sustain pedal and literally let the piano be a reverb.
Yeah. There's a couple of cool things about getting a reverb out of a piano, and I've experimented with this too. I don't remember what the pedal is in the middle, but if there's 3 pedals on a grand piano, I think the left is a damper that just sort of shifts the hammers over, so that instead of hitting all 3 strings for a note, it's hitting 2, so it's like a little bit quieter. And then the one that's all the way on the right is the sostinato, right, which is the sustain pedal, where you just push it down and it lifts all the dampers up, and the entire piano soundboard is ringing with every note. But the middle one says whatever notes you've just pressed down, then you hold the middle pedal down, and it's going to keep only those notes ringing. So you can do cool things like voice a chord, hold that pedal down, and then, maybe what you're talking about, Ryan, turn that piano into a reverb. And now you've got a reverb that's actually like playing a chord that's part of your song.
Yeah, and not all upright pianos will have it. For some reason, mine does, where you can play chords. Usually it's a grand piano kind of thing, where that middle pedal is able to sustain those chords. And it's really cool. Instead of sustaining the whole thing or all at once, you can hit chords and then play other notes staccato. But for this creative application, yeah, you can hit chords, but there's nothing keeping people from just doing it as is, don't hit any pedals and just manually hold down something, because that would just do those notes.
Right. And then of course you could also just literally like reach back there and hold a few of those dampers up with your fingers if you're able to do that. Don't hurt your piano, but get creative and try all this stuff. And it's really fun. It makes, I will say about these kind of creative things too, it makes it a lot of fun to record, even when the experiments don't end up working. You do stumble on things that you really like and that stick, but don't be discouraged if you try some things and you don't end up using them. That's just part of the exploration.
Yeah. And, if I could just touch on the balance of going deep in the weeds with these techniques and actually getting things done in a session, like, when I'm working with clients, I try to make sure that the core things are taken care of, like drum tracks, guitars, vocals, background vocals, bass, all that core stuff. If there's time, we'll try this stuff. And if we have a lot of time budgeted to just getting sounds or creativity, or maybe I'm recording at home for my own thing, right? I don't mind taking time to explore. But if somebody's coming in from out of town and we have one day, well, our drum tracks are going to be done by 2 p.m., then our guitars are going to be done by 4. We're going to be on vocals by 6, 7 p.m. and we'll be done by about midnight. So like if it's an out of town client, like I'm going to be really focused on the core types of things. But if it's something with a little free on the time where we have some time to see what we get, or we have a few days to work on a whole project and we're flexible, then we can get into these creative things. So yeah, I'm not advocating that like everybody just has like these giant rabbit trails in the middle of a session. These have to be done with the ultimate goal in mind of actually completing the record.
I think that's great advice. And a reminder too, that some of these tricks can happen after those core tracks are recorded. They can be like a treatment of the core track later when there's a little more time. Or if you're doing a session and you're sort of getting the core elements done in the hardcore time frame, but it's fun for you to experiment a little bit, maybe the experiment is, an opportunity to throw in a free hour or two here and there on a session or whatever, where it's like your client feels like you've really gone above and beyond, but you've also made the above and beyond something that's really fun for you to do, instead of, comping 100 vocal tracks during that extra hour or two.
Yeah.
So cool, man. All right. Well, what do you want to talk about next? Sympathetic vibrations. Any other cool things?
Yeah. So the fourth way of doing it, we've talked about change the method, add some air, sympathetic vibrations. The fourth one is record out of time. So the first way to record out of time, again, maybe I'll find several other ways and things, but the first way is record out of time with speed. So with faster speed. If you were to use a reverb chamber and you were to play your project, let's say a vocal track, and you were to change the sampling rate of your project to where it's playing back at twice the speed, play that into a room, your recording space, wherever. You record that sound. When you bring it back into your project at the original sample rate, your room will be twice as big as what it physically is.
Dude, you're so cool. I can't believe you just brought that up on the podcast. That's the coolest idea ever.
Well, here's the thing, is that BBC was doing this experimentation with dialing in the acoustics of Abbey Road Studios, I believe. It was the big studio. I think that was Studio 1 or something. But it's this old video I found, and the guy's like, it's like the 70s, 80s video, and the guy's like, here's how we modify the acoustics to fine-tune how the studio should sound. And they actually take a tape machine and they play it back 8 times. And they play it back 8 times the speed into a model. It's a 1:8 model, and they do all this like fancy stuff of trying to emulate the densities of the walls and things. And they were doing it to test out the acoustics, kind of like how you put a car into a wind tunnel. But my mind immediately went to, oh my gosh, they missed something. They missed an opportunity here, because I could actually make, if I wanted to, I could make a model of a studio in my garage. The size of it may be the size of a hot tub, or the size of, a large refrigerator box. But if I could play something 8 times into something the size of a refrigerator box, and it had like a miniature model of a studio, then I could actually use that studio as a chamber, like as a real effect.
Yeah, I love it, man. What's funny is I'm going to really geek myself and date myself, but I remember reading the Audio Engineering Society journal where they explained that technique. They showed it. And this was in the 90s. They showed playing high frequencies, like ultra high frequencies above human hearing, into tiny scale models and re-recording those and measuring those. And then they would just simply scale those results down to demonstrate and test out acoustical design for theater. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, of course, there's limits of how far you can go with this. I mean, I would say that if you just want to, get a cool vocal effect, then you could take your room, you could just, load it into a different project. Let's see, if you record at 44.1, you load it into, you export your vocal, then you load it into a project of 88.2, then it'd play back at twice the speed, right?
Right, but make sure when you load it in, you don't have it compensate for the sample difference.
Right, and you'll hear it. Yeah, it'll be twice. It'll be a chipmunk voice. But then record that, then take that recording, save it as. You see, I haven't tested this out yet. So, usually I test out my ideas before I start talking about them. But
no, Rockstar, so you have to understand, you're listening to cutting edge podcasting right now. This is the bleeding edge of what's about to happen in recording music. So,
yeah. Well, hopefully, because I don't know that anybody's actually done this, and I think there's some really cool ideas out there. But yeah, I'm really trying to find cool stuff to do. So yeah, take record the chipmunk track into your room. That'll be at 88.2. Export that, load the 88.2 file into the 44.1 project, and then all of a sudden that room, which was, let's say, a 10 by 20 foot room, will now be a 20 by 40 foot room. So you're just scaling it, which is crazy. And if you can go up to 192. So I think you could do like 4 times scale. So
I think
now
that's super cool, man.
Yeah, like now all of a sudden, like you have all these cool ideas.
Let's take it another step further. So Rockstars, we're beginning to talk about doing this in a DAW, what used to be maybe a little more common on a tape machine, because you used to be able to take the tape machine, just speed it up. You could maybe double speed. If you had recorded at 15 IPS, you could switch the tape machine to 30 IPS. Play that track back out into the room, record it on another pair of tracks, and then switch it back to 15 and play it back. And you would have just done the same thing, taken your room, make it twice as big. You could also record a part at a higher speed and then play it back at a lower speed. And that can be a really cool effect for something like drums as well, where you now have made the drums sound like these, huge King Kong drums. And you've taken the timing of a performance and also loosened up the timing so it's way more elastic and laid back. And vice versa. If you could record your drums at half the speed and then play it back, you could take a performance that was a little bit loose and behind the beat or ahead of the beat. And it's like analog quantizing. You make the performance sound much tighter.
That's interesting about the quantizing. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, you're totally right on my track of thinking. My friend Brian McTear over at Weathervane, they had an episode where they recorded the drums a little bit, I believe, faster. Yeah, it would have been faster by about 5 or 10 BPM. Mm-hmm. And then with tape, because it's the analog of real waves, then they didn't lose anything, I guess. So they just slowed it down, and it was a very subtle effect, but they were able to kind of add some beef to the drum sound. And I don't know how exactly this would translate to using it in a DAW. I know Reaper has a unique effect where they literally have a scale right in the center screen where you can just scale it up or down like a tape machine.
So great. And Pro Tools used to have that. If I had the, I don't even remember what we called it back then, but the, it was the external clock would allow us to sort of have a slider. It didn't sound as good as far as the clock goes in recording, but it was a great way to just do subtle effects. You could speed the tape up, or you could slow the tape down slightly and make it easier for somebody to hit the high note on a harmony. And then speed it back up. So a lot of clever things that, you know, anybody who started out on a 4-track is like takes these things for granted. Now we're like trying to put, you know, get our biggest mad scientists together to figure out how to do this in a DAW.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about the harmonies, but yeah, I guess the only thing to add to this, and you had a lot of great ideas, is probably bass guitar. I've never worked with tape personally, but I've heard of people doing the bass guitar trick where, they're able to get some upper harmonics by recording slow to tape, and then when they play it back regular speed, there's different harmonics to the instrument there that add on top of the regular real-time playing of the fundamentals of the bass.
Yeah, that's interesting. That would take all the harmonic content and just shift it up.
Yeah. So that's just with the speed of time, right? And I mean, that's just such a rabbit hole to go down. But then there's also reversing the time. And we hear we hear this all the time with like reverse reverbs. But you could also reverse the room. Gosh, I don't even know what you could do. I mean, this is kind of where the rock stars will take over, and we're just kind of the link in the chain. A lot of these ideas, like I've just kind of seen, I've built upon, but what can you do with some of this stuff? Who knows? Like, I think people will come up with even more ideas to add on to this.
Yeah, I think that's great stuff. Reverse recording is another take for granted thing you used to do a tape that was really fun to experiment with and just explore. It's more difficult with the DAW, but it's totally doable. Rockstars, if you want to record something in reverse, to do it in a very simple way, let's just say you have a stereo track that has your music on it. Just select the beginning and the end of the song and, use the reverse plugin in Pro Tools to process it so it flips it around, and then record on another track or a handful of tracks, and then select the same beginning and end point, and then flip all of it back around one more time. And now all your overdubs will be backwards sounding to your original track. So that's essentially what's cool with reverse. You can start recording effects in reverse where your reverbs now come in before the original sound by flipping it back around. Just a lot of cool stuff. But again, you have to really put your brain on for a minute, or you have to practice it until you have a method. So that's just my encouragement with all these things. These experiments, they can be so effective, and it can seem like, some of them can seem a little complicated, or you're trying to remember how you did it last time. But I encourage you to remember that if you find any of these things and you just repeat it a handful of times, you'll begin to be able to do it a little bit more by muscle memory and not have to think so hard and stay in creative mode.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had to figure out how to do a reverse reverb in Ableton Live, I was like, okay, how do I do it? Where do I find it? And I think what it was is I reversed the dry vocal first, and then I applied the reverb, I recorded it, and then I reversed that recording. And then all of a sudden I had, the dry vocal playing forward, but the reverb playing in reverse. So yeah, it's just a matter of just practicing it, but it's some of the ways to just get some really cool effects.
Yeah, super cool. All right, well, are we still, you got any more stuff for us about scaling the time?
Nope, that's it. So
right,
yeah, that's the 4, change the method, add some air, sympathetic vibration, and record it at a time.
Awesome. And then Rockstars, just reminding you one more time, right in the show notes for this is a YouTube playlist with some of Ryan's very, very best videos showing you how to do this stuff. I'll probably even dig into some more questions around that. One of the videos you had that was really cool was a spinning speaker video. Maybe tell us a little bit about that, because that's another that concept of moving the instrument or the mic in a space is so powerful, and sometimes we forget that not all sound sources and microphones need to just be stuck on a stand or sitting in a seat.
Right. So, but there's also the fact that it's not also that microphones have to be stationary, but that these speakers can become microphones themselves.
Right.
So with that, it was a speaker. It was made to emit sound. It was from a Wurlitzer 4100A organ, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I always thought it was a cool effect. And for a long time, this is kind of going on our 4 points. Maybe it was change the method. Okay. So I always thought of it as a speaker, but changing the method, I was like, you know what? It's a speaker, so it's basically a dynamic mic. So what if I just put it in front of the amp instead of connect it to the amp? And so then the speaker, which is moving, it's a very unique looking speaker. For those that don't know, it's a Spectratone speaker. It's basically a tin can at the end of a pole with a counterweight on the other end, and on either end of the tin can has two speakers. So the thing literally spins around like a helicopter. And so it's meant to be maybe a competitor to like the Leslie or something, but it would sit in the organ and it would just spin around and create kind of that vibrato effect. And so the idea was like, well, instead of connecting the guitar amp to it, we could connect the speaker to a preamp because it's a microphone, just like a subkick, right? Mm-hmm. They use a speaker connected to a preamp. So it's speaker in reverse. And so I'm literally using the concept of using a subkick on a kick drum, but I'm changing it over to guitar using this organ speaker that spins around. And it created the effect really well. I mean, I didn't have to match the impedance of the amp or anything. I just could throw it in front of any amp that I wanted to. And it had this really cool vibrato effect. So,
that's cool.
Yeah. And like taking this further, you mentioned the moving mic thing. Like, there's nothing to say that you can't make a pendulum and have a 57 swinging, Right. Like, there's so many things that you can do. Obviously, I'm not going to waste time doing this on a client session when they need to get out the door and make a 10-hour drive back home. But if like you have time at home, like there's no reason why not to create your own phase effect with a close mic on the guitar cabinet and a microphone moving around, overhead on a pendulum. Like
I'm going to suggest something that makes this so stupidly easy that everybody's going to try it at their next thing. So the hanging, the pendulum, the spinning speakers are all so cool, but Rockstars, you can literally take a reamp of a guitar part. Next time you do this, you've recorded the guitar in a DI, you're now reamping it, client's gone home. This is your fun, free time, and you're just messing with sounds. And Ryan, you had demonstrated, a really wonderful stereo effect where the left and right sides are moving differently from each other. And so you get this really organic, you sort of humanly controlled stereo quality. And Rockstars, I'm going to say, take your DI guitar, run it back out through the amp, get a tone you dig. Now just literally press record on the track and sit there and handhold a 57 and just move it, like wave it around like a magic wand, like you're the wizard, like me. And just like wave it around in front of the speaker and be expressive with it. And then do that a second time and pan each of those left and right and see what kind of amazing, so easy, kind of cool, moving, phasey stereo guitar sound you can get out of that.
Yeah, you had a good point there, is that if you do it twice and you hard pan, now you have a totally different effect. Like, it's stereo. So yeah, just do it twice and it just amplifies the effect and makes it really interesting.
I love it, man. Well, Rockstars, there you go. We said you were going to get 4 creative ways, and just like we do, we threw in a bonus and you got 5. So Awesome, Ryan. Thanks for doing that, man. Let's jump in and just hit kind of some of our jam session questions before we roll out. I like to ask, when you started out in recording, Ryan, what do you feel like was holding you back?
Well, I think that I had a lot of assumptions of how things were supposed to be set up in a studio. Like at the first studio that I worked at in my house with the three-way partnership, that guy had vocal booths, and we brought him over and set him up. And, I used those booths for, vocal, and we had a big one for drums. And I just had a lot of assumptions about how things should work. And I later learned that I should just record in open air, even if it's vocals. Like, it can be done and get great results. And
yeah,
so
they say air is the best mixer.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So there was lots of assumptions that I just didn't understand how things can work. And those assumptions kind of put me in that autopilot of we're just going to set up the vocals in the booth. And it kind of, you could say the second thing that was holding me back was just kind of gaps in my knowledge when I first started out, this can actually be done, one example would be phase relationships with drums. And so it was just overcoming these assumptions and then overcoming these gaps in my knowledge. And eventually I found kind of a rhythm and kind of what I really wanted to be as an engineer. And,
let me make a comment there, because
yeah.
I think for the rock stars listening who hear and have heard the expression of phase relationship between the different mics and the drums, when you are not sure what that means, it just sounds so, rocket scientist, where you're like, God, I don't even know. What is that? What's everybody listening for you? And my encouragement to you, rock stars, is that all it is as you begin to explore it and you begin to realize that you can move mics around, you can flip phase on things, and you begin to explore those, it's as simple as you begin to recognize, oh, this sounds better than that. And that's it. And then one day you're just confident about getting the phase right on the drums. So I just wanted to put a little encouragement out there for those who think that it still sounds like high science that, they may take decades and decades to understand. It's just trial and error,
Yeah. And, at the time, it probably took me a few months to figure out that hey, we can get a different result by flipping the bottom mic, flipping that polarity of the bottom mic of a snare drum. But then it took me a couple of years to begin trying out other mics in relationship with the overheads.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that was some stuff that was holding me back. And then once I figured out, I was like, oh man, no more vocal booths because open room works. And then phase relationships, I'm sure there's other gaps in my knowledge, but it just takes some time. But I think you'll eventually, for those listening, rock stars, you'll eventually find that learning curve, and you'll be making great recordings once you just figure out these little tweaks.
All right. So I apologize for digging back into a specific question, but I did have one where I wanted to ask you on the Flint Ziegler recordings that you did, which just sound wonderful. There was a song that had these huge toms in it. Big tom part, simple, and it kind of got loud in the chorus and kind of chilled out a little more in the verse. And the toms have this, Ryan, you have this ability to get recordings that you can have kind of a dark, organic quality to them, but they also sound really clear and focused. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about, just any advice to us about getting that kind of quality. Maybe the big, I don't know if you know which song I'm talking about with the big tom parts, but just getting that kind of big, doom, doom, goom, goom, deep stuff, but still sounding focused on a recording.
Right. Was it the one of Flint playing and then you saw my reflection in the window?
Yeah, totally. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Under the Jaw by Flint Ziegler. And that was largely, what makes stuff sound big is a room, right? Because the drums take on the character of the room. the real trick to this, and the real hack, you could say, is to just understand proximity effect. So know when you're getting too muddy with things. And if you really know how to dial in that proximity effect, you can actually use darker microphones and not be muddy. You can be very well balanced. And I've always been attracted to, ribbon mics, and I even survived off my 414 for a couple of years until I could afford, other mics, because it was just kind of a well-balanced mic. It wasn't too bright or whatever. And I just learned how to dial it in. And so learn how to use the proximity effect and try to capture the room wherever possible.
So the proximity effect, if it's not your friend, means that we're probably leaning on too many close mics up too close to the drums, and everything's starting to just sound boomy and muddy. Or same thing for a ribbon mic, even when it's an ambient or room mic, if it gets too close to the drum kit, is it too boomy?
Right. So the best way to tell is probably listening at low volumes and see if you can hear the character of the drum. Some of the most important parts of the low end is the high end, or it could be the mid range, actually.
Yeah.
So the mid range is I always say the mid range is king, because that's the most reproduced part of the sound in any boombox and Apple earbuds. It's going to be the mid range. So you got to at least have that. So you don't want a microphone that only captures the low end. You want something that's just really well balanced.
I'll comment on that. Sorry to keep interrupting, but Wessel Oldheaton was just on the show, and he talked about that. He talked about the mid-range too, and he reminded us that mid-range, we hear mid-range sort of equally at all volumes, which is one of the reasons why, as Ryan's saying, if you turn the speakers way down low, you're still getting an accurate indication of what's going on in the mid-range, but we won't hear as much low end and high end. So it makes it easy to tell if you're getting the mid-range right, Yeah,
and it's more about helping you judge the sound. So if you're unsure of a sound, just turn down your monitors and see if it sounds okay. Does it sound as big as you want it to? And sometimes it may mean moving the mic a little closer. Sometimes it may be moving the mic a little further away. I want to say in that song that you're referring to, it might have been a distance of 5 inches on the close mics, So it was kind of an open sound. So don't be afraid of a little bit of distance on drum mics. The track that we've been referring to is not a normal drum track. It was basically just toms. But for a normal drum track, snare drum specifically, I would say watch out for your hi-hat bleed, but if you want to open it up your snare a little bit, you can use some distance to get a little bit more natural sound. Mm-hmm. I've never been too much of a fan of a 57 being an inch away from the top of the snare.
Right. And I mean, more often than not, we end up trying to brighten up that close snare mic later on. And an easier way to brighten it up in the recording process is just back up the mic a little bit so that you're not getting so much proximity overloading the upper frequencies.
Right, exactly. And that goes back to the kind of the whole thing of balancing out the low end, giving yourself more high end by taking some of the low end out. And that's all mic position. And to go back to the original quote, what is it?
We just heard your
record like there is no mixing.
I don't know if my mix will take it out, but it was timed so perfectly to hear you say that and then hear the paper turn on your notes. It was great. One other thing popping into my head too, a reminder when Steve Albini was on the show, is he talked about one of the secrets to his just focused, clear drum sounds was proper mic positioning on the drum kit and placement and mic choice, so that you don't have to do much EQ to the drums later, because all that EQ is what begins to smear the phase relationships between those different mics.
Yeah, there really is no free lunch, So if you can get the mic position right when you track the drums, then you can treat as less as possible with EQ. I'm typically a fan of compression, so I usually try to mix with compression first and then EQ if needed. Compression helps me hear things as they blend together, and then it kind of exposes issues, in the mid lows and stuff. But try to get your mics right at the source, because otherwise there's going to be some sort of compensation with EQ, and there's always side effects to using that EQ.
Do you find that when you're recording, you are often able to have the mix-like compression happening so that you can hear the stuff in the tracking stage? Or do you find that recording into a DAW often means you have to record without the compression and then add the compression later?
I usually track pretty dry. Sometimes I'll add compression to stuff going in, but it's just going back to my roots of, not having a lot of outboard. So I just had some pre's, and I would just go just straight to the preamp and right in. So I'm pretty used to hearing it dry, going straight into the DAW.
And I think one of the cool things about that, Rockstars, is that it's a reminder that you don't need a whole lot in order to start making great recordings now. Literally just having some decent mics and a decent pre and capturing it and beginning to understand that mic position will take you a long way. And it also means that by not leaning on those outboard effects that you think you needed in order to get the sound, it will push you towards trying to make sure that the sound you are imagining in your head is actually coming out of the instrument first.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think that going back to my old, these are recordings that I did a few years ago, and I'm like, wow, like they sound really good. Like, and I'm almost trying to chase the tone that I got. And I'm like, how did I get that? And it really comes back. Yeah, it's like I didn't have the same gear I have now. I had less gear, and I'm like, wow, how did I get that sound? And it's because I was basically forced to use creativity in my ears and to move the mics as much as possible to get every single sound. And it's a good sound.
Youth. All right, cool, man. Let's keep jumping forward. So, how about sharing some of the best advice you remember receiving?
Well, I think that some of the best advice that I've received, this is something actually that happened recently, is from my friend Eric Sarafin, also known as Mixerman. He said that it's basically all about the music and the feeling. So a mix is only as good as how it makes people feel. That's all that matters. Does it make people move physically? How does it make them feel? He had a really cool way of taking out the technical and focusing on just the core stuff of the music and the feeling. And it's so easy. Like, I'm a guy that makes tutorials, so it's so easy to forget about that feeling. But that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. And when the music feels or helps us feel something, then if we feel it, we're going to conclude that sound in that song and that recording was the right sound. And it might sound bright and compressed, bright and distorted one day, and it might sound dark and compressed and murky another day. It's just kind of a reminder that depending on the song and the production, right, there's a huge wide palette of what's possible as long as the end result is this thing that moves you.
Yeah, exactly. If you listen to what stuff actually sounds like, I'm amazed at how loud a tambourine is in the mix. And if I were just to, as an engineer, mechanically think of my levels, I would never have the tambourine that loud in the mix. But, just listen to the radio. I'm like, wow, that's a loud tambourine, but it makes the song, go a little better.
Yeah. I like that. I remember when, I got advice years ago. Roger Moutinho was talking about depth and dimensionality in mixes is when some things are much louder and some things are much quieter, rather than trying to have everything all kind of sit just right together. A reminder that experience when you mix something for too long, I feel like it causes you to take all the dynamic quality of depth out of things until you end up with something where everything's just kind of like a general gray, and then you listen to it and you're like, oh, why do I not like any of this?
I almost see that happening the more I revise a mix. Like the first mix has got the best punch. It's got, maybe the floor tom that's got maybe a little too much low end, but by the time you refine it, it almost gets too refined to where nothing punches, nothing really grabs you or moves you in the times that it should move you. So again, like it's a lifelong chase of finding balance.
It ends up like a McDonald's Happy Meal or something, and it's most pleasing to the most palates, but it's not really all that good. So let's how about sharing with us a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something the rock stars could use on their next session. I know you've already shared a bunch, but if there's anything else you just felt like throwing in there, now's the time.
Well, I got a secret sauce. It is when recording guitars, when you have microphones on guitar amps and you have drums in the same room, so you have like multiple people playing in the same room, is to try during the mixing phase, try adding a 20 millisecond delay to those close mics on guitar amps. And if those guitar amps just happen to be hard panned, maybe you have to plan this out. But if they're hard pan guitars and they're delayed by 20 milliseconds, then you have basically a fake drum room mic, because you actually hear the drum bleed going into the guitar amp mics, and it actually gives you the effect of a room mic. It's pretty
interesting. Cool. So the guitar amp originally is maybe kind of close to the drums in that room, and the drums and the guitar just playing together in the same room?
Yeah, I mean, I will try to null out the drums from the guitar amp mic as best as I can. So if it's a 57, I'll point the back of it, mostly at the drums. Mm-hmm. And the positioning on the guitar amp, I may not want the guitar amp pointed right at the drums. So I may point the guitar amp kind of in the same direction that the kick drum is facing and the drummer is facing. But it gives me an off-axis placement with that mic. As long as the sound is okay, I'll keep going with it. The trick is it's in that drum bleed, because it's getting some, right? But you never can hear it. If you delay it, all of a sudden you can hear it. And it's like a free sound that you don't have unless you delay it. Now, don't mess up the performance, right? Don't screw with the music. But if you can do it and you can add a little delay, you can actually hear it, and you can get that kind of little bit of slap back.
Right, you're
really,
saying
really quick room sound.
20 milliseconds isn't necessarily enough to totally change the groove. I mean, that's debatable. Some people may feel differently about that, but generally speaking, you're not trying to completely change the groove. And quite honestly, with most guitar players I record in the studio, a little bit, maybe a little 20 seconds laid back a little more might not be such a bad thing,
Exactly.
Groovy, man. Awesome. Awesome, dude. Well, now how about sharing with the rock stars either a favorite hardware tool or just something physical that you're excited about, and when you have it with you in the studio, it always seems to make better records?
It's got to be my AEA R88 ribbon mic. It's got basically 2 ribbon microphones, and it's set up in the Bloomline configuration. So it's basically an XY, but with 2 ribbons. And the thing always sounds great.
That's awesome, man. That, I believe, is the same mic that John Cuniberti uses for his one mic sessions.
Exactly. In fact, when I got this thing, I was like, man, it's almost like a lantern where the light comes out on all sides. And, I was thinking of sound as being kind of that light and of the lantern. And so I'm like, well, bluegrass people or whatever could just stand around this mic and be recorded. But it turns out that it's really my main overhead mic for drums. It's a fantastic room mic for anything. I can use it as a mono mic, just record one side of it. But it's a great tool that I have.
That's so cool, man. I got to get one of those. I know they're not the lowest price mic as an option, but I believe they're still affordable, and I would love to have one here in the studio. How about sharing a favorite software tool or something particular you're excited about? Any new plugins or DAWs or anything you're just sort of psyched about? I know you use Reaper as well, right?
Yeah, I used Reaper for a while. I had a problem with it visually. Like my eye just kind of always was getting lost as far as where the tracks were in it. And,
interesting.
I'm sure you can customize it, but I would much rather learn a tool and be told how to learn it in the workflow than try to have to figure out a workflow from scratch, you know?
I think that's a cool insight, actually.
Yeah. So, Eric Sarafin was trying to get me turned on to Logic, and I've been using that for a while. And it actually, to answer your question, it has a in-out plugin. So it's just an external in, external out plugin. And I know this sounds so lame, but basically my favorite software tools are just some of the utility stuff. So polarity, simple like delays, like a millisecond delay by 20 milliseconds or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the in-out plugin, you can ping your output, ping the output gear. You can, obviously send stuff to a reamp box, go through pedals, come back in. But it also
can you explain ping your outboard gear for the Rockstars?
Right. So it just says, I forget what it says, but there's a button on it that says, calculate latency or whatever, and it sends a pop out through the gear and records it back in, and then it displays the time. It's just a quick way of doing it. You can do this manually just by playing stuff out of a track, having that track to an output, recording on a new track. But with this, it's just something you can drop it directly in a track is all.
Right.
I know Ableton Live has this. I know Pro Tools has this. So it's pretty common, but it just lets you get out of the box. It lets you just be more creative. With Logic, it has an ability to go MS, mid-side mode, on your equipment. So it was like, oh my gosh, like, do I have to link anything to like compress overheads now? Like I could just do like 2 compressors and it'll be stereo, it won't drift in the stereo field. It'll be 1 compressor for the middle of the stuff and 1 compressor for the sides.
All right, hold on. Let's break that down for the Rockstars a little bit. So Rockstars mid-side mode, if you're not familiar with it, you have stereo is left and right, but mid is a configuration that takes that left and right and it recalculates it, and it says, let's have one that is everything that's in the middle, which means it's in both speakers, and let's have one that is everything that's different in the left speaker than it is in the right speaker. And therefore you can separate them and treat them differently and bring them back together. And in the end, you end up with just a left-right sound again. But what Ryan's touching on, which is so cool, is that, if you wanted to just keep everything left-right and you had 2 outboard compressors, 2 1176s or 2 just whatevers you've got, or 2 different ones, you would be a little bit screwed as far as keeping those as a stereo compressor that you could mix through. But with the mid-side mode, you could actually run it out to the 1 compressor for the mids and the other one for the sides. And it doesn't matter that they're doing things different, because in the end, it's going to still come back and be reassembled as a stereo image. There's other issues you'll run into, like deciding whether you like this, the tone of each processor differently. But that's super cool, Ryan. And I've never heard anybody describe that. So that's a first for the show.
Yeah, like it kind of opened up the possibilities because, I have an LA2A clone. I have a DBX160, one of the newer ones. And so it was like, okay, well, I can use the 1176 clones, or I could put the DBX160 down the middle and the LA2A on the sides, like it just kind of opens up the doors for all these sonic possibilities.
Yeah, and you could do freaky effects on each of them too if you wanted to.
Yeah. And I will say that, the mid-side concept, I want to say the UAD plugin of the Fairchild 670 had the lat-vert option where, if you just have plugins, you don't have any outboard, you can still experiment with this. So yeah, it's something that's there in plugins. Some of them have them, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I know they exist in plugins, and I think a lot of rockstars will be familiar with that. But that's the first time I've heard it suggested that this MS as an in-out plugin to leave the DAW and go through 2 different pieces of gear and back in again is useful in that way. That's really hip. Well, so let's jump forward. And we're going for a long time here, but I'll hit you with a couple more questions. We'll do them quick. How about either a resource for the business side of sort of doing your studio professionally, or just any advice you have for people? Anything you want to share?
Sometimes relationships can really come in handy. I've had relationships with people with gear that they want to trade for studio time, and I've been able to build up my studio. And I've had relationships with people like my piano tuner, where they don't mind coming and tuning my piano, but they need help on their website. And I just happen to be a guy that knows how to build a WordPress site. I mean, it's nothing complicated, but you'd be surprised, like what you have to offer people and how much can happen just with a little bit of creativity and building your business and relationships.
I totally agree. And shout out to my bro Aaron for giving myself and my daughter some pretty great haircuts in exchange for a little recording recently. So think outside the box. I believe in my time I have had cabinetry built. I've gotten haircuts. I've gotten chi energy massages for helping. I've done photography. So there are all kinds of things. A club owner who was a friend, I was able to exchange for credit at the club to be able to go and take my daughter to go have a beer and dinner. She wasn't having a beer, but I was, and watching music. So I think that's great advice and thinking outside the box. There are a lot of ways that you can barter with people in music that might, sort of net you more things than you need or that you need, that are above and beyond just simply trying to have people, pay you money for stuff.
Yeah, totally.
All right. How about an organizational online resource or any tips for keeping your shit together in the studio?
Well, for me, it's just keeping the studio in one piece. So when I come in, I say, okay, just put two things away. And usually if I just put two things away, then I find that it doesn't go for 3 weeks with having a vocal mic in the middle of a spot and it hasn't moved. So for some reason, I just find that just a little bit of organization and just putting things away. I mean, there's so much to put away. There's so much to keep track of in a studio. But if you can just do a little bit each day, you usually will do more than two, and it just kind of keeps the studio clean.
Do you have any thoughts about how a studio can begin to acquire too many things and no longer, have space for them? Have you run into that yourself? Have you come up with any sort of life philosophies about holding on to things or letting go of things in the studio?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still figuring that one out, but I have seen it here where, okay, like I have a lot of stuff, and there is kind of a philosophy that I go by where, I could sell some of the stuff, but, an SM57 is more valuable to have around than to make $40 or $50 off of. So there's some things that don't take up a whole lot of space and I'm happy to keep, and it's not really beneficial to get rid of. But there's some things that just should get, they should just be gone, and they do nothing but take up space. They take up mental energy. They get in the way. They keep you from your goals.
Don't say my tape machine, man. Don't say my tape machine.
So, if it keeps you in the way from being your best, which I don't think your tape machine is, then, consider how much you need it.
I will add this, which pops into my head thinking about it. Having a lot of stuff is part of being a studio. Having a solution for everything is part of, I think, what makes a studio and sets you apart from the band's rehearsal space for doing something, But if you can't find it, then it's not valuable.
Yeah. Eric Sarafin was over here, and he asked me if I had something. I forget what it was. And I said, oh, yeah, I have one of those. I don't know where it is. And then he goes, well, it's the same as not having it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're right. It's the same as not having it.
I have tried a lot of different things. I've leaned on the help of interns and assistants to sometimes organize, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think the best way for organizing is for me to go around organizing everything and then just sort of make it clear where things belong so that other people know where to put them back. But I've also just sort of, you have to have some grace and acceptance that not everything's going to be perfect, and that's okay, and sometimes stuff will just not get put where you can find it, and that's a little bit part of it. But you probably did more productive, creative stuff, and that's why you can't find it now, because you recorded a record last month or whatever. So in the end, It's okay that it's not perfect, because it's probably a sign of the fact that you're just making a lot of music.
Yeah, exactly.
How about sharing with the rock stars? I haven't asked this one in a little while, but I'll let you answer it quickly. Imagine you sort of had to start all over, new town. You wanted to record, but you didn't have anything, and you were starting out. You had a like medium small budget to get going. Make that up, but you needed a simple setup to record. You needed to find people to make music with, and you needed to make some decision about making ends meet. I won't ask you to answer how do you feed a family of 6 right off the bat, but let's just say for people who are starting out, what advice would you have for them about simple setup, find people to record, make music with, and making some income so you can survive through this? Do you want to share any ideas about that?
Sure. So if I had to start all over from scratch, I would start with probably an 8-channel interface, probably with preamps built in. It's better than not having any preamps, right? So
and they all sound pretty damn good right now too.
Yeah, I mean, having it is better than not having it. Just because it's not like the best doesn't mean that it's of no value. So 8 decent preamps and a built-in, kind of interface is good. And so 8 channels, because I gotta be able to record a drum set. And then probably for mics, I would get probably some good dynamic mics like SM7B, maybe some ribbons or like a 414. I would try to double up on duties, so whatever is overhead or overheads can also be used on a vocal. Whatever can be used on toms can be used on guitar. So just rely more on dynamic mics, rely more on mics that are a little bit more mid-range centered, like a dynamic mic, because that mid-range is more of a workhorse kind of direction. You can use it on more things if it does the mid-range really well. At least I think.
I think that's smart.
And then finally, to top it off, and this is a little off the path here, but some sort of camera. I mean, I think that if people never see these clients of mine, they're never going to know they exist. So I got to have a way to help them market themselves for crowdfunding sources, So going further with this, how would I sustain this? How would I promote myself? I would probably develop some sort of package where I can record a quick demo, use my camera, help them film a very basic video to, run a Kickstarter perhaps. Then from there, I can help, create some video releases on top of the audio content. And ultimately, the goal is to kind of create kind of an ecosystem where, you're showing off the client, but you're also showing off yourself, right? And then those people that see the video may come to you for work. You create kind of an ecosystem that kind of circles around, and hopefully you get the people that you want to work with in the genre and such. Mm-hmm. And then you just kind of live off of referrals, 3-4 generations deep.
I think that's good, man. I think that goes a long way. And just a thought about the camera, a reminder, rock stars, a lot of times you're busy if you're engineering in the studio, and you're too busy to be both a photographer and the engineer. But on tracking sessions in particular, in my experience, you're very busy at the beginning, and then you're rolling. And if you're producing and it's very involved, then yes, you're busy all the way through. But if you're engineering, there's a little bit more of a breather once you get rolling. You're kind of, it's like you're you're the head engineer in the engine room of a big steamboat, and you're just kind of watching all the dials for a while. And those are good times once the band's sort of going through takes where you can grab the camera and just kind of get some photographs of people. And those are also the kind of photographs that they'll be so thrilled to see later. So that is a really great bit of advice that's kind of easy to deliver extra on.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you could a lot of these cameras can run for hours. So just find a way to plug it in and make sure you have enough data, and then you can just let it run, and you can go back later, find the different takes. I record to a separate computer for that kind of stuff. But I mean, if I were in a random city, dropped in, starting over kind of thing, I would just let the thing run and just get as much footage as I can, get some alternate shots, get some funny moments, anything I could.
Yeah, I think that's great, man. Well, let's take us to the last question. This is hypothetical as well. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You're going to go back in time, find young Ryan. Did young Ryan have dreadlocks, or is that just new Ryan?
Well, that's new Ryan as of 6 or 7 years ago. But
all right.
Yeah, I would have told.
I didn't ask you yet.
Oh.
See, man, now the rock stars know that you knew the question. No, it's okay. But the question I was going to ask is, if you could go back and give yourself advice, what would you say is the single most important thing to be a recording studio rock star yourself one day? If you could go back and find that young, not yet dreaded Ryan.
Right. I would say have confidence. Don't hold back.
Dig it.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many decisions that you make because of that, right? If you don't have the confidence or you're holding back.
Where are some of the places that you remember feeling like you held back a little bit and you wish you hadn't?
Well, getting out to network. Just my personality is just, somewhat showed out. Somewhat introverted, so pushing your comfort zone and getting out and socializing more, and that's good, that kind of stuff. Yeah, just pushing my comfort zone, but really it was the idea that there's so many other studios, and you mentioned Echo Mountain earlier, and it's like, Echo Mountain is in this town, so what right do I have to be here making recordings and stuff?
Right. They call that imposter syndrome. And I think we all suffer from it. I still do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about, And so I would have just said, dude, Ryan, just get out there, kick some ass, have confidence, don't hold back, do it.
I think that's great, man. And it's so funny, it's a reminder to us to hear you describe yourself as feeling introverted, yet to hear your voice, which just is great to listen to, and watch your videos and just see you as like this natural extroverted YouTuber and teacher. It's a reminder to us all that we are not always all that we seem at first glance. We all struggle with a lot of the same stuff, and we've all got the same. All got the same amount of time, same amount of resources, same amount of creative energy of the universe to tap into. And if you see anybody that inspires you with what they're doing, take that as a sign that you can do it too.
Yeah. I mean, the big thing is courage. I mean, it takes a lot of it, because you start, at least for me, I start getting in my own head. I say, well, all these people are doing it better than I am. Who am I? And the hardest part is getting started. I mean, when I first posted videos, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna upload a video, but after I started, it got better, and I gained some confidence. So you just got to keep doing it. You'll gain confidence, you'll gain courage.
So awesome, dude. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars, dude. It was a blast to hang out with you. And I love that you just set the bar for us and a whole bunch of new concepts that I think we'll be excited to go try out. Let the rock stars know how they can find you online if they want to go watch your videos, find out more about you.
Yeah, just creativesoundlab.tv and just Creative Sound Lab on YouTube. Also on Instagram, I'm just Creative Sound Lab with underscores between each of the words.
Awesome, dude. And then Rockstars, a reminder that, of course, the links are going to also be in the show notes. You can just click through on your mobile device or go to rsrockstars.com, find the blog post, and it'll be right there, including the YouTube playlist so that you can check out some of these great videos of Ryan's right away. And I look forward to hitting the studio with you, Ryan, sometime soon, man.
Yeah, man. Me too.
We got to do something. What are we going to do? Rockstars, let us know what we should do, and maybe that'll give us some good guidance.
Yeah, that'll be super cool.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, thanks for joining us. I will see you around the studio, and go make some great music.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, dude. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.